Welcome to Scrolling to Death. I am overwhelmed with gratitude for today's guest. I first saw you, David. We didn't meet in person, but I was at the Nicosi Global Summit a couple weeks ago in DC, and I was able to hear your story about your experience at Facebook, and we're going to talk all about that today. But I wanted to give you a little background on Scrolling to Death. I created this to educate parents on social media. I thought I would maybe be giving parents tips on how to introduce social media safely to our kids and how to monitor them. And I quickly realized that social media is not really safe and we need to change that, right? I named it Scrolling to Death because I very clearly saw a link between social media use and overuse and harms to children that could be deadly: suicides, overdoses, and drug poisonings, threats from predators. I met a lot of parents who have lost children to something to do with social media. And the problem still is that most parents believe that these platforms are safe. They're allowed for 13-year-olds. They must be safe for them. We believe these companies are taking reasonable precautions to keep our children safe from the many threats. Social media companies employ trust and safety teams. TikTok presented at the same event that you were at. They shared that they have 40,000 trust and safety team members dedicated to protecting children, but children keep getting harmed and the stories keep rolling in. So what am I missing here, David, if we want to start with why do you believe these companies are not succeeding at keeping our children safe?
There are companies that are succeeding and there are companies that are not. And the contrast between the two is highly informative about this debate. My personal work experience included time working in a senior role at YouTube and then at Facebook. And in the talk I gave in Washington, I kind of drew the contrast between those two experiences. You know, at YouTube, we were working originally on just protecting intellectual property. So we had a program called Content ID, and content owners could use it to make sure that they had control over copies of the things that they owned that users posted up to the platform. But to make that work, we had to develop this world-class audio and video matching technology so that we could see just 5 seconds of video and know that it came from somebody's content that was registered in a database of hundreds of millions of pieces of content.
What year was this?
So this was, YouTube developed that back in 2007 originally. I worked on it from 2011 until 2017. I led the whole program, in fact. We realized that once we had developed this amazingly good video and audio matching technology, we could put it to other purposes. And the very first one we did was actually in a different realm. It was terrorist videos. So a fun fact, if somebody uploads a video of ISIS beheading somebody, 1,000 other accounts will upload the same video the same day. They'll try and swarm YouTube with it. So with our matching technology, we were able to develop something where if you find one copy, you can delete all the copies. And it occurred to me that we could do the same thing for child sexual abuse material. So I got together with our head of safety and we worked out a scheme to do it. It's complicated because you can't actually possess that video. You can't keep a copy to use for matching. But the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children can. So we partnered up with them and we gave them the technology to make fingerprints of these videos that we could use for matching purposes.
Incredible.
And it was incredibly effective. We were able to eliminate virtually all child sexual abuse material from YouTube. And I have to say, you know, this cost a lot of money to do. It affected lots of users, and the company never once suggested that we should do less than what we were doing. They never once questioned the budget. They never once interfered with what we were trying to accomplish. Who
would when you're protecting children, right? Who would, David?
Well, yeah. Then I had a somewhat different experience when I went to Facebook. So Meta today, but Facebook when I was working there. So I wound up with what I thought was the world's weirdest job title. I was the director of harmful behavior for Facebook.
Oh,
yeah. We were all about trying to eliminate scams, extortion, terrorist recruiting, harassment, and most importantly, what went by a variety of names in those days: child grooming, inappropriate interactions with children, whatever you might want to call it.
Did you have a big team working on that?
No, we did not. We had
Okay.
we had about 4 people on that. I
Oh,
had well over 100 people at YouTube working on Content ID and related things, but we had about 4. And one of the reasons that they were interested in having me do this work is I had a pretty extensive academic background in
hmm
things like detection theory. And that's a very important thing when you're trying to detect a thing. You need to understand the state of the art of how to detect things.
hmm
When I got to Facebook, I was kind of alarmed that nobody really knew anything about detection theory.
Oh,
Nobody could tell me how accurately they were able to locate harmful content,
hmm
or when they located potentially harmful content, how accurate that identification was, how many times it was harmless content that was mistakenly identified as harmful
okay.
content.
hmm
So even basic things like basic metrics like that that tell you whether you're doing what you need to be doing and how well you're doing it were lacking. There had been some work already underway before I got there, but I jumped in and we worked on measuring how much what they called at the time child grooming was going on. So sexual predators trying to form online relationships with children.
hmm
Um, the company had an idea that that was a problem because some of those conversations get flagged by users. They report them to the
Yeah.
company. And when they're flagged, they would sometimes even get checked. Not always, but sometimes.
hmm
And so, based on the prevalence of those reports, those flagging incidents, the company was estimating that there were tens of thousands of pedophiles affecting hundreds of thousands of children on Facebook globally. And that sounds like a big number, but it's not big compared to, Facebook's global audience or anything. So it wasn't a complete, fire alarm going off at the company at the time.
hmm
But we undertook to actually measure it in a meaningful way. And based on my experience, I understood the meaningful way is that you find all the interactions that you can between adults and children, and you sample them. You send a sample of them for review, and you find out what fraction of those are problematic.
hmm
Pretty quickly, we found out that the company's estimates were way, way off, and there were actually millions of predators affecting tens of millions of children. And
hmm
this is primarily on Messenger and Instagram, because this is, personal messages from adults to children
hmm
soliciting nude photographs or trying to meet up in real life or all kinds of other things. I mean, we saw horrific things. We saw parents who were exchanging text messages, conspiring to sell their children for sex. We saw, it blew my mind what we saw. That was a stressful job, I have to say. Um,
Oh,
but once we discovered that this was a really big problem, we wanted to analyze it further. So we used some information that Facebook has that's not widely known or widely advertised. They
hmm
actually make very accurate estimates of how old each user really is. So when you sign
hmm
up, put in a birthday. You can put in any birthday. You don't have to show a driver's license. You don't have to prove it. Any
hmm
birthday.
hmm
But your behavior tells Facebook how old you are, what kind of
hmm
slang you use, who your friends are, what birthday you just announced that you were having, or you got congratulated on by your friends, what grade
Right.
you're in school,
Right.
things like that. So people who say that they're 19 years old but are in the 6th grade are probably not just being held back. They're probably lying about their age.
hmm
So there are lots of users under the age of 13 on Facebook, and Facebook knows it and tolerates it and doesn't challenge them.
Are they're re-aging and actually logging that data and holding it, or
Yes,
they're
that's right. That's right. So
okay.
they constantly update based on new information, the best estimate of the actual date of birth of each user. And there's also software, people have images that they share a lot, and there's a lot of software around that can estimate age from an image of a face. So
Right.
there are lots of signals, and all put together it forms a very accurate picture of the age. So we used that
hmm
information to refine our estimates, and the problem got bigger because a lot of the pedophiles, it turned out, were pretending to be children in order to seem safe in interacting with other children.
hmm
And a lot of the children were pretending to be older than
And
they were
right.
as well.
Right.
So once we really knew the scope of the problem, we thought, geez, how are all these pedophiles finding victims on Facebook. So we did some analysis to learn how these interactions had gotten started. And to my complete shock, we discovered that the main way that pedophiles were finding child victims was through a Facebook feature called People You May Know. So Facebook says, here's somebody you might know or you might want to be friends with. And they were showing pictures of children to pedophiles, and especially doing it in the same geographic area, local children, which is incredibly.
Did they have to have mutual friends, or what were the factors that went into that recommendation?
Well, typically the pedophiles would join a group or otherwise, through searching. Facebook is a very refined tool for finding the people you want to find. Mm-hmm. And, when the people you want to find are potential victims of extortion, of pedophilia, of even for terrorist recruiting, that's a very dangerous capability. Mm-hmm. And so if the predator got into one group or found one or two children, then the algorithm would start suggesting others. So that was by far the way that most of them were getting their victims. So that was, as you can imagine, that was a total panic attack. I escalated that to the very top of Facebook. And I said, we have to do something incredibly urgently here. Mm-hmm. And so a group of senior executives flew out I was working in London, and they flew out from Menlo Park, from headquarters to London to discuss this. And so my team, put together a detailed presentation with all the numbers and all the data, all the methodology that we'd used, clearly explaining how we were using the true estimated age instead of the stated age of each person, everything.
Right.
Yeah, and so we wrapped up with some recommendations. We said, first and foremost, we should stop recommending children to adults through People You May Know today. Yep. We should just go make that code change, push it out in the next 2 hours, get it done. Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, we should do much more scrutiny of messages between adults and minors, and we should block messages that appear to be possibly problematic and not let anybody know. If somebody's sending a message that we think is potentially concerning, we should put a message in front of them saying, basically, a warning message of some kind that basically says, we're looking at you. Because when people know that you're looking at them, they usually stop. So those are some of our recommendations. Easy to do, would have been highly effective. And the senior person in the room said, David, you're in the community integrity seat at this table, but there are a lot of seats at this table. Now, the community integrity team at Facebook, at Meta today even, reports for some strange reason up to an organization called Growth, which is responsible for maximizing how many people use Facebook. Mm-hmm. And what he made it clear to me was that what we wanted to do, which is take down the accounts of millions of predators, would be harmful to Facebook's numbers. So they didn't let us do anything. They didn't let us stop recommending children to adults. They didn't let us block messages. They didn't let us do anything. Continue with what we had in place, which was a team of 5 people, just 5 people, 5 full-time employees who were referring cases to law enforcement as they came up. And because a referral to law enforcement is complicated, you have to go look at the entire history of all of the person's communications that you're referring. It takes one person about a week to do one case. So the team of 5 was capable of doing about 5 cases a week, and we had millions of cases. So nothing was happening.
Right.
But, believe it or not, it actually got worse.
Oh, no.
About 2 weeks after that meeting, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook at the time, Meta now, announced that he had decided that the company would, as soon as they would encrypt end-to-end all these communications that we were basically able to monitor by being in the middle of it. They would encrypt them end-to-end so that we could no longer monitor anything. We could no longer tell if somebody was sending a dangerous message. We could no longer detect anything. And his rationale for it was that this was a good way to protect activists and people like that from overzealous governments who wanted to, snoop on their communications. And I don't know that there was ever really a problem with snooping. I was never made aware that there was. It was more overzealous governments would constantly subpoena communications, and sometimes Facebook would push back on that. But, the company has to respond to valid subpoenas from duly appointed governments. Anyway, because of the timing of it, 2 weeks after all this stuff came up, and because the real effect of encrypting all communications was to relieve Facebook of any liability. If they can't see it, then it's not their problem. I really don't believe his sort of cover story for why they went with encryption. And at the time, I really tried to push hard back against it. I asked, senior leadership to reconsider the decision. I asked them at least to allow communications involving minors to be available for safety review, and they rejected all those recommendations. So I resigned. I left. I'm not the kind of person who quits when things are tough. I'm the kind of person who over and over and over again have kept fighting for getting a good result. And I realized that Facebook didn't want a good result. They wanted to keep predators on their platform because they were worth some money and some shareholder value.
This is just devastating, David. I mean, how do we justify a human being who is aware that there are millions of children being actively groomed in that moment, and then not only not doing anything about it, but hiding it so that he and the company is not liable? How do we justify that there's a human being out there that would do that?
Well, I'm not completely sure that everyone I worked with in high tech qualifies for me to consider them at least a human being. I think some of these people are inhuman beings, but I think there's a mentality in high tech that what you're doing in connecting people in the world in social media is just by definition is a good. It's a social good, and they're so convinced of this that they can't really cope with the evidence, the massive, massive evidence that it's not a social good. It's actually a huge social ill, especially for children. We've all seen the stories. I think you did a podcast on one of them about, I'm from an era when the bell rang at the end of class, it was a hubbub. Everyone was talking to everybody else, and now it's silent.
Yeah.
And
it's creepy.
There are so many things that are wrong with changing all of your relationships to be with your device instead of with your peers. There's so many things that are dangerous about that. But the thing that I think people, when they're thinking about those dangers of social media, that they neglect is that when you give your child a fully internet-enabled phone, you might as well have just moved into a cheap hotel that's full of sexual predators, that's full of sex offenders. No parent would do that, but you're basically doing that. And, the number of kids who are affected by sexual predators online is massive. It's not a rare thing. It's very, very common.
Can I assume that Facebook, now Meta, has not implemented any new strategies to help protect kids online since you left?
Well, they have ramped up to some extent. I don't know to how much extent. They've made a little bit of public noise about getting child predators off the platform. One of the problems with that is if you kind of just boot a bunch of them off the platform, then they create new accounts, come right back, resume their activities. Facebook has never kind of figured out that that's a pattern, and it's actually a signal that they could use. If someone is off the platform and then they come back and reestablish relationships with the people they were talking to before, it's probably the same person. They have this massive, massive problem with fake accounts. So Facebook has publicly announced that they have deleted well over 30 billion fake accounts. I mean, that's 4 times the population of the planet Earth. They've deleted more than 30 billion fake accounts. But based on my experience, I think that probably about half of the accounts that are on Facebook today, on Meta today, are fake accounts. I've got a lot of personal experience with fake accounts and with reporting them to Meta, and Meta saying, no problem, they're fine. So my wife is an author, and there are other people who have accounts that use her photo and her name and sell things. And Meta says, that's fine. It doesn't violate our community standards, when it clearly does.
Well, a lot of these fake accounts, a person will create multiple accounts on one device. And these companies log device ID. So this is a very easy fix regarding how many accounts are on one phone. And also for children that set up 7 accounts on that they shouldn't, because they're just trying to hide stuff from their parents.
Yeah, I made that argument while I worked there, and they said, people share devices. That's the real reason that you see all these different accounts on the same device.
Cap it at 2,
I know. But where we are with this problem is that the companies that are so insistent that self-regulation is the only approach that's reasonable. Facebook says we can manage this ourselves. We can, they sometimes actually come out in public and say, we want regulation, but they don't. That's just PR. The lobbying behind the scenes is completely anti-regulation. But but they promise that they will solve this problem themselves with their own self-regulation, and it's a joke. It's the things that they do, the things that they Facebook boasts about the 30 billion fake accounts they've deleted. Why is that a good thing if they got created in the first place? I mean, why doesn't Facebook make you prove your identity to create an account? I mean, obviously, the reason that they don't is that it would greatly reduce the amount of traffic that they have, and the amount of users that they have. Their stock would crash. Right.
But their children that are being harmed, parents are just so confused by this. And is the people you may know feature still active that you're aware of?
As far as I know, yes. As far as I know, it is. And and I think it's an incredible thing that a simple fix like that, and it's really a very simple fix, a simple fix like that would not really hurt Facebook's business in any meaningful way, is even that is not something that they're willing to do.
And other platforms are also using, so Snapchat, for example, has a quick add feature, and it says, you may know these people. Snapchat is better with friends, like really encouraging children to connect with people that they're suggesting. And this is how a lot of children are getting connected with drug dealers and getting access to fake pills with fentanyl, is through the recommendations by Snapchat. Of course, a kid's going to say, oh, they're saying, I know this person. This must be my friend's friend or someone at school. And not only that, they can't even see the real picture. They have cartoons, Bitmojis on Snapchat. They look like little angelic children.
And Facebook's just launched a new feature, or Meta has just launched a new feature where they're supposed to be making messages safer. If somebody sends somebody else a nude picture or something like that, then they blur it and show a warning that says, this may be
nudity. I think it says this may contain nudity. And you think a teenager's not going to click on that?
Exactly right. It's not even trying to be effective. It's just doing things. The word I use over and over about what they're doing is it's performative. They're just doing things that they can boast about doing that have no danger of actually inhibiting the amount of traffic they have, including this vile, harmful traffic.
Right. And by showing us that they can identify a nude image, and we also know they can age people, they know how old people are, they're locating nude imagery of minors, child sexual abuse material, and then not removing it. Aren't they required to remove CSAM from their platform if they identify it?
Yes, and so they're taking great pains not to identify it as CSAM. So they can identify it as nudity and call it a day. Even if they have the technical capability to identify it as CSAM, they don't do it. So the system that we built at YouTube to eliminate CSAM on the YouTube platform, we made available to the world. It's free. Anyone can use it. So Reddit uses it, Yahoo uses it, Adobe uses it. Facebook doesn't use it. Facebook won't use it. They refused to use it.
Because they make a lot of money off the engagement they get from people exchanging nude imagery, including children.
They had some other explanations that, for why they do it. I think the big worry was if they were sending YouTube fingerprints of all the videos that were uploaded to Facebook, YouTube would be able to tell that a lot of those videos, if they chose to, they would be able to tell that a lot of those videos had been pirated from YouTube. But that wasn't YouTube's intent, and that's not how the system is built and set up and implemented. And it's done in a partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's a very well monitored and well managed kind of system. And it's, as I said, it's free. So, but they won't do it. So they do have a system for identifying, certain problematic videos, but that system is incredibly ineffective. If you just take a video and say tilt it by 10 degrees or something like that, they won't recognize it. There are lots and lots of ways to modify a video with really minor modifications that don't affect its viewability at all, that totally defeat Meta's existing system for identifying a video. So even if they've seen that harmful video before, they fail to recognize it. And then if it does eventually get recognized, then they, or it gets flagged or something, then they have to report it to NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And so because they're not blocking videos in the first place, their flood of data, their flood of videos to NCMEC is bigger than every other company combined.
Wow.
They're saturating NCMEC. They're overwhelming them with the volume that they give them.
They're not tapping into the available AI to even recognize the duplicates of the harmful videos.
No.
Right.
And the other funny thing about Facebook and AI is when I worked there, it's been a few years since I worked there, but when I worked there, they were incredibly proud of their machine learning and their AI. But I'd come from Google. YouTube is part of Google. I'd come from Google. So let me just say I was not impressed. Their machine learning systems were almost completely unusable, and their artificial intelligence was a joke. And Mark Zuckerberg didn't know this. He really thought that they had state-of-the-art AI when they didn't at all.
Right.
Now, things have changed. Now they have large language models. Everybody has large language models. They're a dime a dozen, but they have large language models, so they can say that they've caught up with the world in AI. The thing with Facebook's machine learning is that it required massive human effort to label data. So data labeling means you send a human reviewer 100 videos, and they have to label each one saying, is this child sexual abuse material, for example? Is this nudity? Is this pornography? Or is this okay? And that labeling work is what you mentioned, the 40,000 people that TikTok has. I expect it's probably the same thing there. That Facebook was advertising at one point, they had 30,000 content reviewers. Well, at any given time, most of the content reviewers are spending most of the time labeling training data for machine learning experiments, not looking at real content, not looking at the things that people flag. So if you want to run an interesting experiment, browse Facebook long and hard until you find something that's bad, and you will. And, or Instagram is particularly easy to do. Yeah. And flag it, report it. And what will happen is 2 days will go by, and then you get a message that says, no one was available to look at this and the time expired, so we're allowing it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what happens.
Oh my God. Why is there a time expiration on something that's harmful? The transparency thing is big for me. Like, we wouldn't know that this was happening or had happened if you hadn't shared. We wouldn't know, a lot of the harms if there weren't lawsuits in discovery or Frances Hagen hadn't spoken out. And I mean, I'm appreciative that you speak out. Parents need to know these things. I wonder, did Facebook ever release those actual numbers, those tens of millions of children that were getting harmed and groomed?
No. I'm glad you mentioned Frances. I stayed quiet for a long time. And when I left the company, I didn't take any documents or even my own personal notes with me. I left every speck of material behind. Yeah. I've never before in my life violated a non-disclosure agreement or an employment agreement. And when I saw what Francis had done, I just couldn't really live with myself keeping quiet anymore. And so I wound up becoming a whistleblower myself. But you're right about the lack of transparency. And this is why I think one of the key things is strong oversight. So I do think that the company needs to suffer really significant financial penalties for every case of their platform being used to harm minors. I think really strong monitoring and oversight is necessary to find out whether they're getting that done. And without that oversight, I think, it's just going to be this self-regulatory joke that exists today. When the end-to-end encryption plan for all messaging was proposed, my prediction was that the platform would become a cesspool. But when I look back on it, I think it already was. And I think it still is. The case that the state of New Mexico brought against Meta is interesting in that they not only identified a bunch of cases of New Mexico citizens who'd been directly harmed, but they created some fake accounts. They pretended to be young girls and things like that. All of the accounts that they did, that they set up, every time it attracted predators. It attracted, really nasty predators, and it attracted porn. I think the message, that your podcast is sending is a really good one. If you're allowing your child to be part of that community, then that's going to be your child's experience. If you say, yeah, you can, have a phone and you can have a Facebook account on it and you can have Messenger and you can have Instagram, then you're basically saying, and you can look at the nastiest porn you want to, you can talk to predators, you can feel free, have at it. And, I think a lot of parents really are conscious that they're making that decision.
Right.
And I really think that they should look at the alternatives. There are good alternatives. Your kid can have a phone, and the phone can be free of social media. And that would be a very good thing.
Right. And the harms and we're talking about Facebook and Instagram today, and Meta particularly, but there are varying levels of harms in the same kind of functionality across the board. Some are better than others. A lot of parents say, I trust my child. They wouldn't make those decisions. They wouldn't fall for it. But I've talked to too many parents whose child was harmed or killed or died because they made teenagers make dumb decisions. Smart kids make dumb decisions. Teenagers with underdeveloped prefrontal cortices, they make silly decisions and they don't think it through. And they should learn from their mistakes, not be harmed to this level. And so what I'm hearing from you is you would recommend that we don't let our children and teenagers access social media at all in order to keep them safe, or what would you advise there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I would advise. I think children feel like social media is essential in their lives. And if they live without it, they find out it's not. I had a friend of our family, her son was affected by this. It was the classic scenario where somebody pretended to be a cute teenage girl and managed to get him to send a nude picture. And then immediately it was, demanding a lot of money and, demanding he not talk to anybody else.
Yeah.
Luckily, he had the sense to talk to his mother, and luckily his mother had the sense to get in touch with me because she knew my background. And, I was able to give some advice and help them out of that situation, and that's great. But I also have talked to a lot of parents who weren't so lucky and who did lose a child. And there was one case of people I talked to actually at the event in Washington. The whole thing took 2 hours. 2 hours in the middle of the night. And the parents had no idea until much later, when they were finally able, after a lengthy legal battle, to get Facebook to reveal the contents of the messages that had preceded the child's death.
Yeah. And I think that's probably John DeMay, whose son Jordan was a victim of financial sextortion. And they were actually able to extradite and try 2 of the Nigerian men who had been the predators in that case, which is the first of its kind. Most of these predators are getting away with it. There's been a lot of people blowing the whistle on sextortion attempts, specifically on Instagram. And Instagram did recently announce, you probably saw, Facebook and Instagram, they removed, I think it was 70,000 accounts and groups that were linked to sextortion in Nigeria
Yahoo
and the
Boys.
surrounding. Yeah. What do you think of updates like that? Do you think that it's kind of a smokescreen PR play, or do you think that that will actually be helpful?
No, it's, I mean, we did that. We did one of those when I was still there. You do these, you have to, you do these rounds once in a while, but unfortunately, it's not much of a disruption to their operations. They just, they have, at any given time, they have developed a vast number of benign looking fake accounts. They haven't done anything wrong yet, but the account is there and it looks normal, and they can just, pick up and resume their activities with new accounts. It might cause some victims to be suspicious if the account was removed and the person comes back to them with a new and different account, but they usually have a good story for why they're doing that. Children are by far not the only vulnerable population out there that's getting harmed on Instagram. So one of the ones that the Nigerians target a lot is widows of American military. And they have a whole playbook for that. They have playbooks for lots of different communities of vulnerable people. And they're incredibly well organized. I mean, they collect their payments by having you send things like Apple gift cards to a P.O. box in Texas. I mean, this is not just in Nigeria. It's run from Nigeria, but it's global organized crime. And that's part of the soup that we're tossing our kids into when we say, yeah, you can have an Instagram account.
Right.
Kids aren't typically as valuable as blackmail victims as adults, but they're much easier they're easier prey. They have fewer defenses. They have less experience. They're not as suspicious. So
yeah, they're more vulnerable, and they'll make those quick decisions without thinking it through. So David, I am not going to allow my children onto social media. I don't feel that it's safe for them and adds anything positive to their life, really. But my kids could get access on their friend's phone. My kid could get access on their school-issued device. They could go down to Walmart when they start working and buy a $50 phone and get access. So we have to regulate these companies and rely on our legislation, to force these companies to be safer for our kids, because we can't control everything in our home and we cannot protect them fully. So are you supporting any specific legislation? I know that the Online Safety Act passed in the UK where you are, but can you give me an update on what you're thinking around legislation?
Yeah. So in addition to, I mentioned before that I think we need, strong oversight and strong penalties. In addition to that, I think it would be useful to enforce a stronger real identity on social media platforms. The hiding behind fake accounts is just an incredibly bad idea. It's incredibly, dangerous to allow that. And I know that social media companies will fight tooth and nail because they know that most of their traffic around half at least of their traffic will go away if they stop permitting fake accounts. But that's all that traffic is bad traffic. There's no good that comes from allowing a fake account on the platform. I think that they need to be forced to allow safety review of children's messages. So, I'm perfectly fine with activists being able to have end-to-end encryption, but they already had that. I mean, there are other platforms for that. You can use Signal, you can use Telegram. So why do you need end-to-end encryption? And WhatsApp has always been end-to-end encrypted, but WhatsApp is not a platform that helps you find victims. WhatsApp is purely a communication platform. You have to know someone to connect with them on WhatsApp, but on Facebook, the methodology of all of the abusers on all these different areas on Facebook is always the same. Use Facebook to find the people you want to find, then
move them,
create relationships, and then go on to private messaging and do the things you're looking to do there.
Right.
And so I don't think that there's a valid case for allowing that to be hidden behind a veil of encryption when it's a known fact that there are many, many kinds of abuse and crime that are being committed in that exact mode. I know it's a polarizing issue because a lot of people really feel strongly that encryption is incredibly valuable in a lot of contexts. And I agree, it is. But I think we can define some contexts in which there's just no excuse for allowing encryption, allowing it to defeat any possible systems of safety and trust and safety kind of review.
And for minors, it's not really appropriate for minors or adults communicating with minors, especially.
Right. Yep. I've actually been in conversations with a few regulatory bodies in the U.S. and have shared my lists with them. And
amazing.
And I'm really hopeful. I'm hopeful that we'll get some action. The one thing I want people to really understand about these companies is the way that they think about things is somebody comes up with a new idea for a feature. So I'll take just one specific example because I worked on the same thing when I was at YouTube. So we had this big idea that police were misbehaving at public, like at protests and things like that, using excessive violence.
Okay.
So we thought we would create an app that would allow people to take their phone and live stream what they were seeing on YouTube. We called it Project Witness because everyone would be able to witness what was going on. And even if the police took away your phone, you'd already streamed it. It was already out there. It was live. And we took that to the leadership of YouTube, including Susan Wojcicki, who died a few days ago. Miss her. But and in the review, she said, "We're not launching this. This is too dangerous. There are too many ways to abuse this. People will use this to broadcast harming other people. They'll use it to broadcast committing suicide. They'll use it to broadcast, horrible things. And we have no way to control that. So we're not launching this." At Facebook, a team of people built the same thing, and there was no review. They just launched it. And people did commit murder on live streams. And they did commit suicide on live streams. And they did torture people on live streams. And, all kinds of horrible content. And that's just okay because, it's all for the greater good of connecting people.
Wow. And that's still happening, David. Children and teens are reporting seeing live murders and live suicides on Facebook Live, on TikTok Live, and being traumatized by it. One poor girl, Anna Schott, took her own life within months after being served a live murder, a live suicide video. And parents can be very clear coming out of this that these companies that say they're safe for kids are going to prioritize profit and engagement over our children's safety every single time. We need to do our best to protect them from the predators that are going to harm them, from the addictiveness of the platforms, and from all of the harms that exist there. I, on behalf of parents, am so grateful to you for sharing. I hope that you don't have any regret about doing that because you are saving lives in sharing your story and making it crystal clear what parents need to do to protect our kids. And David, is there anything else you want to share with parents before we close out?
I think it's really extremely difficult to tell your kids, no, you can't do what all your friends are doing and be on social media. I think it's incredibly difficult and an incredibly brave thing to do. But if you'd ever talked to the parents of an affected child, and there are lots of them out there, you wouldn't be able to live with yourself as a parent if you did allow your kids access. And you're taking an enormous risk with your child's well-being and even their very life. And it's not something that you would ever want to look back on and say, I made that decision. I let that happen.
And there's actually no psychological data to show that kids suffer any negative consequences if you keep them off of social media. And on the contrasting side, if they spend 3 or more hours on social media, they're facing double the risk of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. And so, there's that, but there's also these stories of severe harms that you can show your child at some point. Some stories are harder than others. Filter them and see what you think is okay. But a lot of parents are reaching out and saying, I showed my teenager this video, this interview, and they get it now. So bring them in on the conversation and bring them in on the information that's becoming available. And they will thank you one day, maybe not now, but I truly believe that that's the safest decision for them. And we have to, being a parent is hard. We have to make the hard choice.
That's right. I mean, we want our kids to love us and not resent us for the boundaries we put, but that doesn't mean we don't put boundaries.
Right. David, thank you so much for doing this, having this conversation, sharing with parents.
And I hope more people do come forward, because there are a lot of people who know a lot of other things that haven't come to light yet. Even with Francis's revelations and mine, there's a lot more. There's a lot more.
I implore, if you consider yourself a human being that cares for any child in this world and you have a story to share it. You'll save lives if you do. And you're saving lives, David. And we thank you.
Well, thank you, Nikki. I think you're doing an incredible job. So I hope it helps a lot of people.
Thank you, David.